was trying to figure out what the best way is to live, right? How do I go about this thing we call life properly? I don't think that a person can try to help the world until they've improved themselves first. And I think that helping everybody else comes naturally after that. But the focus has to be on self-improvement first, because that's the only thing we can control. And it has to be constant, because a lot of people will point to certain things that they've done for their character development and, sort of try to identify with that. But if that's not something that they've done, that they do all the time, then it can only go so far, right? And it turns out you can do quite a bit if you don't waste any time and you're always trying to be better at everything that you're doing. You can accomplish a lot of stuff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Starstruck with Sarah Pachter, brought to you by Aish. Here on this podcast, I interview celebrities, digital influencers, and philanthropists, as well as those with stories of unusual resilience. I try to draw out the deeper meaning behind their everyday choices and share that with you in a relatable way. For more episodes and other content, subscribe to Aish.com's podcast channel. On this week's episode, we have a very cool and accomplished guest joining. His name is Jesse Orenshein. He is an author and screenwriter and sold his first screenplay at the age of 24, believe it or not. And he has also written 14 children's books. To top it off, he is a 4-time competitor on American Ninja Warrior, and additionally announced this week his first film is going to be featured at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City. Incredible. This guy is on fire. Let's bring him on. Welcome, Jesse Orenshein.
Thanks for having me.
Of
course. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited. So I'm not going to make the listeners wait. We got to get everybody into this. I want to know about this movie that you wrote, and tell us, please, the crazy story of how it was purchased.
The purchase. That was exciting. It wasn't exciting in the moment because I didn't know what was happening. But I heard somewhere, I actually don't remember the source, but I heard somewhere that, the money that we have comes from our children. It's like a Jewish thing, right? That supposedly all of our livelihood comes from the kids. And my wife and I had gotten pregnant. It was during COVID. I wasn't even, one of us or both of us weren't even working at the time because everyone was like confused about what was going on, right? And this guy I'd never met before reached out to me on LinkedIn just to talk about the film industry. He wasn't even trying to buy a script. And in our conversation, I pitched him my story, not even to sell it, just because it was relevant to the conversation. And he basically ripped it out of my hands and forced me to send it to him. And then his company ended up buying it. But if you look to the day that we got pregnant was the day that this guy who I had never met reached out to me.
Wow.
And that was really, really cool to see that whole thing in action. Now I just look every time, we either are pregnant or about to have a kid, I'm like looking over my shoulder, waiting for another giant opportunity to hit me in the face.
That's hilarious. That's great. Well, is it true that this past week it was announced that it's going to be playing at Tribeca?
Yeah, which is wild because I'm trying to launch a screenwriting career here, and selling a script is great, but it is not production, and production is great, but it is not reception. Nobody knows that this movie was made. And so it's really crazy that we've made it to this stage. It's also amazing because I think very commercially and I write very commercially, at least in my opinion, but we got this director who's super artsy, like the opposite of me in every way. Every decision he made I would never have thought to do that. And so when I watched the movie, I was so surprised, like I shell shocked, and have remained that way since then. And so I can't believe we're in the festival. I have no idea what's happening now. I'm just along for the ride.
Wow. Well, can you give us an example of the commercial versus artsy situation?
Okay. They shot the whole movie in 4:3 aspect ratio, which is like close to a square. The shape of the screen is like close to a square.
Oh, wow.
The Snyder cut of Justice League was like that. There have been movies like that before. We didn't invent it, but it's very unusual, very uncommon. There's a lot of long takes in the movie, so usually there will be a bunch of cuts in every scene. But directors who are trying to make their mark in the world will try to do a whole scene in one take, and so the camera will just slowly move through everything, and it's a whole choreographed dance. And
wow, that
to
sounds
each their own,
Yeah.
I'm
That's
glad he had
very
fun with it.
interesting. Right, right. Okay, so we're going to get to your crazy stories from American Ninja Warrior, but first I want to understand, you not only wrote movies, or you not only wrote a movie, or how many movies have you written?
I mean, I've written a lot of scripts. I've only sold one.
Okay, fine. So not only have you written a movie that has been sold, but you also wrote 14 children's books. I mean, I know as an author that the children's book market is very, very difficult to penetrate. How did you just go ahead and do 14 of them?
Yeah, so it's actually 19. It's
Oh,
14, but there are five in the queue. So
okay.
they're fully illustrated. They just have to be compiled. We have to do the typesetting, the cover pages, etc. But they're pretty much done. And I I basically went from being a screenwriter to being a book writer. I think that any Jewish kid in Los Angeles who wants to be a writer just defaults to screenwriting. At least, like, I just assume that that's what you do if you're a writer in the 21st century. Um, but somewhere along the lines, I've always worked with kids. I just realized that this was my calling. I was reading a lot of kids' books. I was the youth director at a synagogue, and so I was reading books every single week. I have the Lorax like, memorized. It's 56 pages long. I can recite the whole thing by heart.
Wow.
Um, and there were so many books that just really didn't impress me. They didn't make me feel anything. The kids didn't respond so well to them, and I just thought that I'd try my hand at it, and it's been an amazing journey. It's definitely what I'm designed to do, born to do, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. Um, we're actually looking for a larger publisher right now. We want to partner up with someone to take it to the next level. So I've reached out to a whole bunch of publishers, and we have an entire catalog of books. And if the right publisher is ready, this is hopefully a huge opportunity for them.
Wow, well, that's great. So you basically were working with kids and you were reading them some of the books and you realized, hey, I could probably do a little bit better here. And that's basically what happened. Because I've read your books and they are awesome. They're so creative. My kids love them. My favorite is the Tied Together, I think it's called. Is that
Yeah.
right? I even remember the title, right? And there's another one about dreams that I loved as well.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
Making Dreams. That's a great
they're
one.
so good. I mean, Jesse, you're just so, so creative. You know, if you had to pick one book of yours, which one is your favorite?
Whoa, that's a tough question. First of all, thank you for all the kind words. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, they each do a different thing. I have one that has my favorite illustrations. That's Making
Okay.
Dreams, like you said, right? Because that illustrator is just it's phenomenal. I gave him such a small prompt. He's working off of 4 to 8, maybe 12 lines on a page,
Right.
and he just created an entire world. No one asked him to do that. There's little hidden creatures everywhere. The trees are
Mm.
like made out of 1,000 little whatever. His mind works on another level, and he just did whatever he wanted, which was awesome. Um, there's a concept that I like. It's my favorite concept
Mhm.
because my wife and I came up with it together. We were standing at a street light on our way to Disneyland, and there were like 1,000 people waiting behind this light. And we were joking, what if nobody's pressed this button, but everyone keeps showing up and assuming that since there are so many people, someone's already pressed it, right? And so I wrote this book called Green Means Go. That's about a street light where everyone who shows up assumes that and doesn't press the button, and the line backs up around the entire world. And
Yeah.
it's so sweet, and it's such a great lesson that you shouldn't wait for other people to do what you should be doing. Um, then I have one that's my favorite collaboration. Working with this illustrator was just amazing. She's actually done two books for me. She did The Storm, which is about two raindrops who are in love trying to stay together during their first storm. And she wrote Up and Away, which is about a balloon that wants to see where all the other balloons go when they're released. And so she, sneaks out of her house and starts flying past a whole bunch of levels of things that don't actually exist. And that illustrator is just such a pleasure to work with. Her name is Anna Coleman. I highly recommend her if anyone's listening.
Great.
She's awesome.
Well, as
I
you're
have,
telling me, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, okay. I have one that has my favorite rhymes. I don't know if
Okay.
everything else is the best, but it's just my favorite rhymes. And then I have another that's the most sentimental, obviously, because it was my first book that I ever did. But if I had to pick a favorite, putting all of that aside and taking it all into account, I would probably pick the Book of Firsts, which is
Okay.
about. Do you know that one? Do you
I
have that one?
remember it. Remind me, remind me.
Yeah. It's about all the pioneers who made the world the amazing place that it is today, except that every single one of them is totally made up. And the things that they invented never needed to be invented. So it's really, really silly. and I love the illustrator. He lives in Indonesia, and so he has this take on life that's just the total opposite of what the way I see everything. Yeah,
Well, as you're telling me about each of the books, I'm slowly remembering because I have them all, or I have at least the 14, and they're just so great. And what I love about them also is that they each have an important lesson. Like it's not just like a fun, interesting storyline. It's that there's something that your kids can take away from it, which is, I have 5 kids. I'm constantly reading to them. So I appreciate your books. But I do want to know and move on to the question that I guess I had for you was what motivates you to write the books? What gave you the inspiration?
it's the only thing in my life that I don't need motivation for. It's my guilty pleasure. So if I have a whole bunch of work to do and I also have a book I want to write, that book is going to get written and all of the work will be neglected
Okay.
or pushed until later. So I don't know. I think that people have callings in life. I think we're designed to do things. Um, and once you figure out what that is, the people who I know who are like that, who know exactly what they want to do, don't need motivation.
Right. Do you consider American Ninja Warrior fun or work?
Um, Both. I think it falls into one of those categories. I'm
Okay.
built for it.
Okay.
It works. It works well
Okay,
for
good.
me.
Well, we're going to get more to that, but I also want to hear a little bit more about your movie. How old were you when it was first purchased, and what is it about?
I was 24 when it was purchased. It's about a guy whose wife has recently passed away, and in his grieving, he discovers a guidebook on the dark web that claims to be able to unlock the power of human flight. Of course, all of the steps to achieving that are totally ridiculous, and so everyone thinks he's, losing his mind because he can't cope with the loss of his wife, and he is having a really hard time. And so it culminates with him standing on the edge of a cliff because he's supposedly reached the end of that process to fly, or maybe he just can't take it anymore, not having her in his life. And I won't tell you how it ends, but that's 30 seconds before it ends. So,
Wow. Wow. I mean, I think that's going to really resonate with people because so many people have dealt with loss. So I'm excited to see it. But now let's get to American Ninja Warrior.
all right,
Tell us a little bit about the show. How do you get on the show? Just start talking about it.
start talking. Okay, so I was always I was always into this kind of stuff. When I was 6 years old, I set all the records at the camp that I went to. I remember at one point in my life doing 72 push-ups in 54 seconds. I would tell everyone about
Oh,
that because I
wow.
was like 8 or something when I did that. Um, I did 14 pull-ups when I was, I think, 6 years old. It was my first year at sports camp, and the second best in the whole camp was one. Kids can't do pull-ups. Pull-ups are super hard.
I can't
Um,
do pull-ups. Yes.
yeah, adults can't do pull-ups either. I guess are. The second best was one. I remember he was in my group, the guy who did that, and his legs were kicking so hard. I remember to get over the bar. I'm friends with him now. We joke about that sometimes. Um,
Cute.
yeah, so I was always into it. For my 10th birthday, my parents got me a workout machine. You know, that classic, like 7 foot tall pull up bar with the leg raise bars and dip bars. And at the bottom, it has somewhere to hold your feet for sit ups. It's got like it's a whole calisthenic machine. They got me that for my 10th birthday because they're awesome parents. And that was such a great idea. So I always worked out. And I used to want to be on Wipeout because that was the show back in the day that was like physically challenging and looked like a lot of fun. And then I must have been 15 years old or 14 years old or something when I was at LA Fitness one day. And as I was walking in, this guy saw me and he goes, "Hey, we're hosting auditions for American Ninja Warrior. You should come." And he gave me the flyer. And I was like, "Oh my God, I would love to do that." And he goes, "You're 21, right?" Like, no, not for a long time, but thanks, guy. And then that started off my whole journey. So I've been working out towards that goal ever since then. And
Wow.
then you had to be 21 to get on the show. The year that I turned 21, they changed it to 19. So I would have been
Oh.
probably the youngest competitor, but instead there were a bunch of kids who were better than me.
Oh, wow. Well,
But you send in a video. You create like a whole video that showcases your character and your strength, and you send that in, and then they choose out of a pool of tens of thousands. I've heard from one producer that it was 200,000 people applying, but I have no idea if that's true.
wow. Well, what really strikes me about you is that you have this really creative and intellectual side to you, and also this athletic prowess. So, can you tell us some of your stats? Like, how fast can you run a mile? How much can you bench press? Anything like that?
Wow. Okay, my stats. This is about to get really unimpressive really fast.
Okay.
I'll tell you this. On the show, everyone who specializes in something, which is pretty much everyone on the show, they're all better than me at what they do, right? I
Okay.
can't rock climb at all compared to the rock climbers. And the guys who do parkour all day can triple backflip off of a tree stump. I can't do that stuff. But if you were to create a challenge that encompassed all of that, I'd fare pretty well. And that's why I do well in the show. I'm
I
super
see.
well rounded. I'm not great at anything,
I
but
see.
I'm
I
super
see.
well rounded. So I could do about 35 pull ups, about 10, maybe 15 muscle ups. I could do a 54-inch box jump, which is pretty high. I swam 3 miles one time without stopping. Took me an hour and a half. Held my
Oh
breath for
my
4 minutes. Um, that was two separate occasions. I didn't swim the 3 miles in 4 minutes.
gosh.
My favorite thing to do with running is I get to the bottom of this hill. It's about a quarter mile long, and I wait for a bus to show up because there's a red light, and then I race the bus up the hill. Never won in my life, but if there's a little traffic, I can get close. Um, I could do Bruce Lee's V hold. If anyone wants to look up the greatest physical challenge of their life, go look up Bruce Lee's V hold. I could do that for a few seconds, not much. I can do one-handed push-ups, handstand push-ups. My greatest accomplishment of all time physically is I can do 3 one-handed pull-ups.
Oh,
That
wow.
took me absolutely forever. Like I've been working at that for 5 years.
Wow. It's funny because when you say it, it doesn't like sound so crazy, but then if you actually try to do any of that, it's really, really tough. So,
Yeah, try
okay, so I
hanging
want
with one arm. Just
that's what I mean. Like, it doesn't
hold on
sound
to the
so
bar.
crazy when you're talking, but then to think about actually doing it, first of all, with 2 arms and then with just 1 is it's not really so possible. Definitely not for me. Jesse, tell us about American Ninja Warrior. What is this show exactly?
American Ninja Warrior is an obstacle course competition. It's they try to brand themselves as a sport. I guess it's becoming more recognized as a sport. But basically, competitors try to get across this incredibly difficult obstacle course challenge. Is about 6 to 10 obstacles, depending on what stage you're at in the competition, and they range from anything like holding on to doorknobs that turn, dangling through the air while climbing at an upwards angle, to running over spinning balls that if you don't hit them directly on the center, it'll just roll you into the water. And once you hit the water, you're out, no second tries. Um, it's really, really intense. That's what you see on camera. What you don't see is the grueling process building up to being on the show, right? So you train all year for a couple nights. So there's that whole year of training. Then once you submit the video, you anticipate getting on the show. They finally accept you on the show, and they do that about 6 weeks in advance. So I spend a solid 6 weeks just, if I think about it, my heart rate starts to accelerate. I sweat. It's crazy the amount of anxiety that I go through leading up to this show.
Right.
I have the added pressure of representing the Jewish people because I wore Keepa and tzitzit the last time I was on it. Um, if you watch the video of me on YouTube, you'll see that I'm not wearing Keepa and tzitzit. That's a whole other thing, which I
I
can tell you about.
did. I did. I would like to hear about that because I did see that clip, and I just wanna say it looks nearly impossible. It doesn't look like things that humans should be doing. That's all I'm gonna say say because it was wild to see that clip. But tell us about the fact that you were not wearing a kippah versus you were.
Yeah, so I don't know if people should be doing it, but we do it. I don't know. I can't speak on the uh, the shoulds. Anyway, so yeah, wearing a kippah. I wore a kippah in front of the camera, but I had a buzz cut at the time, so I knew it wouldn't stay on my head. And I kind of thought that you're supposed to be topless on the show. Everyone else was just, you just take your shirt off and run the course. That's what everyone was doing. So I kind of thought that was part of the show. Anyway, so I wasn't wearing a kippah or tzitzit because I was not wearing a shirt and I couldn't fit a kippah on my head at the time. But I put it on. I said a little prayer in front of the camera, then took it off and ran the course. But they started my clip on TV from the second obstacle, so you don't actually see the part with the kippah. And that became one of my biggest regrets from the whole show because they said I'm a modern Orthodox Jew, I keep kosher, observe the Sabbath. Blah, blah. They said it on the show, but I just like there's no representation. It doesn't look like anything,
Okay,
you
I
know?
mean, I hear you. I hear you. But what is that like to be, representing the Jewish people on this show? Have you had any interesting stories there?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll tell you this. This always gets me because it's funny to me. You spend about I spent about 9 hours waiting in line to run the course. Okay, they start filming. They film through the night so they can control the lighting. So at 8 p.m. we get there, and I didn't run the course till 5:30 in the morning.
Oh,
And
wow.
what you do during that time is you talk to all these other people because in order to be on this show, you have to have something very interesting about you. And so I'd ask people, I just say, hey, what are you in for? And this guy turns to me, he's probably about 40, 45 years old, and he says, my I've had 4 heart surgeries between me and my 6-year-old son. And I was like, oh
Wow.
my God, it's crazy. I'm so sorry. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so sorry though. And he goes, no, it's okay. What's your thing? I'm like, I'm Jewish. Yeah. And he's like, wow, that's amazing. Tell me more about that. And as I'm talking to him, all these other people start crowding around. And we have this whole, like, I'm just telling everyone about Judaism, just to a whole group of people who are Olympic athletes and like a professional rock climber and an NBA player. And they're all listening to me tell them about Judaism. And so always tell people that story. And it took a couple of years before I met that guy again, the guy with the heart surgeries. And I said to him, dude, I got to tell you, every time I tell people about American Ninja Warrior and they ask me, oh, do you meet the competitors? Are they interesting? I tell them, yeah, I met this guy who had 4 heart surgeries between him and his 6-year-old son. And the guy looks at me and he goes, no way. I tell people I met a Jew.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Like that's
Wow.
his big story is that he met a Jewish guy. And I think I made a good impression. We talked for like hours that night.
Wow. Well, that's so beautiful that you can be the first Jewish person anyone's ever met. I mean, it sure is a lot of pressure, but it's pretty amazing. And the fact that everyone was surrounding you and talking to you about Judaism, like that's really, really cool. On that note, how does Judaism influence your life in general, and I guess also on the show?
So yeah, that's a question that a lot of the people on the show would ask me also. They always want to know, how does Judaism influence your life? I never really know what to answer because Judaism is my life. I don't it's not like some side thing that comes in to influence me every now and then. It's the starting point for all of my decisions, right? So
Mhm.
even for something like competing on the show, how am I going to compete? What am I going to wear? What am I going to say in the interviews? All of that is dictated by Judaism. I have to wonder first, am I going against anything here? Am I missing anything? Is there something that I should be saying and representing properly? So I think that it's a great starting point, and that actually relieves a lot of pressure for me. I feel like
Right.
because
Right.
I don't have to start from scratch anywhere. You know, I once heard somebody say this thing. It's like this amazing. It was an amazing sentence that really stuck with me. I think it was a kid asking a question to me because I work in a high school, and so he comes up to me and he goes, "What do we believe about the afterlife?" And the big question. We had a
Yeah.
long discussion about it. That's not what I'm going to answer here. plenty of
Okay.
plenty of sources for that. Go look them up. No, but what got me was the words "we believe." What do we believe? Because belief generally is not seen as something that multiple people can have, or that I can tell you what we believe, right?
Right.
But that's the amazing thing about Judaism is if you don't have a starting point for something, you don't know anything about it, you can kind of say that. You can go ask the question, what do we believe about competing on national TV? What do we believe the about wearing the Keepa and tzitzit on camera in front of millions of people, making a Kiddush Hashem, right? Putting a good name for Judaism. What do we believe about? It's I don't know. It was very freeing for me, this idea of what do we believe.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of want to go here, even though it's really off topic. But so, what did you tell him about the afterlife? Can I ask you that on the podcast? Is that crazy?
No, it's not creepy.
No, crazy. I didn't say creepy.
Oh, it's not crazy either. I would start by reading Derech Hashem, which was written by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. It really lays out everything that we believe about that. I think the one of the main misconceptions is that people tend to think that we die and go to Olam Haba, right, to the next world. But it's laid out pretty clearly in Derech Hashem that the next world is a future stage. Has not, like, after death we go somewhere else. It's like a waiting period, and they come back here, and spiritual and physical realms kind of mesh into one for a whole other dimension of existence, right? And so, as a starting point, that's, I think, where a lot of people have it wrong. But read the book; he does a way better job of explaining it than I do.
Okay, will do. So I guess now that we're on that topic, what is your favorite aspect about Judaism? What do you love about being Jewish?
I love the learning aspect of it. I love that the highest honor we have to bestow upon someone is calling them a Talmid Chacham, which means a wise student, right? There's no such thing as becoming a master. It's just, you're just a student for the rest of your life. And the people who I respect the most in the Jewish world are people who spend their whole life learning. And my free time is spent learning. I learn quite a bit every day, a bunch of different topics. And you sort of have to be like a lawyer and a historian and a linguist. And, like, you have to, a psychologist, a doctor, you have to combine every field at once and know so much about it in order to get a grasp on the full extent of what Judaism has to offer. And so this idea of spending your lifetime learning is always exciting for me. I like to learn.
Well, that's a great answer, and I think it kind of, in a weird way, mimics what you're doing physically. Like you had mentioned that on the show, you don't really know what they're going to present to you. You don't really know what the obstacle course is going to be. So you got to be good at this, and you got to be good at that, and you got to be good at this. Similar to the fact that you have to kind of be all parts in the learning sphere also. So tell us about some of the things that they do on the obstacle course or they require from you from the obstacle course. You had mentioned the doorknobs, but what else? You mentioned you love to learn about Judaism. You mentioned obviously you are a writer and you have this really incredible athletic capacity. Is there anything else you like to do in your spare time?
Yeah, I'm like a serial hobbyist. I love things. I love to learn things. Right now, I'm learning to be a sofer, actually, which is like a Jewish scribe, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
Torahs, mezuzahs, all this kind of stuff has to be written by hand and has to abide by literally thousands of laws. Um, I told that to the American Ninja Warrior people, and they actually liked it so much that they had me bring my quill and parchment backstage before the show,
Oh,
and they taped me writing the third line of Megillat Esther.
wow.
So I wrote the first two lines the night before in my hotel room, and then on camera I wrote the third, and they filmed it. They were getting close-ups, and they were all like enamored by that. So that's definitely a hobby of mine. I spend a ton of time with my family. I love my family, and I try really hard to be with them, to be around them. Um,
Well,
let's
can I
see.
ask you a question
Yeah.
on what you mentioned about the Sefer Torah, which is writing a Torah scroll? What would you say are like the top three rules that you have to like? What makes it so hard? You know?
Okay. Well, if a single letter is written incorrectly, then the whole Torah is invalid. It can't be used. It can be fixed, but it's it can't be used while it's not written properly. So at the very least, every letter has to be written according to dozens of laws per letter about exactly the right shape and form. And that's very difficult to do, especially with the quill, because the quill is an actual carved like goose feather, right?
Wow.
So I carved it myself with a surgical blade, this whole thing. Um, and so that's difficult to do, just to maneuver that properly. And it's tiny. You're writing letters that are 2 millimeters wide, 3 millimeters wide. Is certain lines there are a tenth of a millimeter. I mean, it's crazy.
Wow.
Then
Wow.
if two letters are touching, the whole thing is invalid. And there's a really deep lesson in that. It's a really beautiful, deep lesson, right? On the one hand, every letter has to be written properly. You have to do your job in life. You have to achieve your specific individual task, because the Jewish people are likened to the letters of the Torah, right? At the same time, you can't do someone else's job. So if you're touching another letter, meaning like you and that other letter are trying to do the same thing, right? Doesn't work. And so
Wow.
just those two rules as an example are like a whole metaphor for the Jewish people and how we operate, with the individuality and also the collectivity of it, right? The collectiveness, if you have one letter missing, it's all invalid. And if one letter is doing another letter's job, it's all invalid.
Right. And it also ensures the accuracy of the Torah that through the generations, it is exactly the same as it was from the get-go.
Yeah, it
So,
has to be copied from another Torah. You're not allowed to write a Torah. If you memorize the whole Torah, for example, you're not allowed to just write it by memory, and you actually have to say the words out loud as you're writing that. So
wow.
like triple ensuring that it all works out. And now we actually have computers that you can run a Torah through and it'll scan the whole thing. I think it's like $1,000 and you have to send it to a specific place, whatever, but they can do it and scan the whole thing in a computerized way. Sorry.
So fascinating. Okay, so I guess I kind of want to know, I don't know if you can do this on a podcast, but tell us something that you have never shared before, either on a podcast or maybe just a news story or something interesting. Give us some good stuff.
What a question. About what topic? Just my whole life in
Anything.
general?
Anything.
There's something I feel a little guilty about.
Let's hear it.
Okay. The problem with being really, really creative when you're 15 is that you do ridiculous nonsense all the time, especially for a guy. So when I was 15 with all of my guy friends, I got a gorilla suit and we would go out on Saturday nights and kind of just like terrorize the neighborhood and like run towards people on all fours when they were least expecting it.
Oh my
Anyway,
God.
so one time I I did that at like a restaurant. I think we pulled up next to Jeff's. My friend had a convertible. I would just jump over the side of the car when we'd stop and run towards everybody. And somebody got really scared. She screamed and dropped her phone. And I think it broke because she was
Oh,
yelling at us afterwards. Anyway, if you're listening, random person, and you can prove that, I'll reimburse you.
oh, that is so sweet.
No, but
Wow.
that does that count? Is that what you're looking for? That's like the most
Yeah.
random story I can think of.
We love random, we love interesting, we love guilty stories, so that's great. Let's wrap this up with one final question. You know, you write and you inspire others to be creative. You obviously work out and keep fit, and you push limits and achieve great things. All of these are really positive messages. But Jesse, let me ask you, if you had to pick one thing, what is your most important message to the world?
Yeah, so I actually have an answer to that. When I was 14, I started carrying around this little journal in my back pocket. It's like the size of a credit card. Um, and I would write down all of my best ideas in there, not movie ideas or anything, just my ideas about life. I was trying to figure out what the best way is to live, right? How do I go about this thing we call life properly? And it took me about 4 years, I think, to come up with an answer that I couldn't beat and haven't beat since then. And the answer is constant self improvement, which I know might seem really, really simple, but that is the way that I live my life. And all of the words in that little phrase are chosen very, very intentionally, right? I choose improvement instead of growth because growth is something that happens passively. A plant will just grow, right? Rain will hit it, it'll grow, but it can't improve itself. Improvement is something that's active, right? Self improvement, because I don't think that a person can try to help the world until they've improved themselves first. And I think that helping everybody else comes naturally after that. But the focus has to be on self improvement first, because that's the only thing we can control. And it has to be constant, because a lot of people will point to certain things that they've done for their character development and, sort of I try to identify with that. But if that's not something that they've done, that they do all the time, then it can only go so far, right? So constant self improvement was my big closing idea, and ever since then, that's how I've lived my life. And now I try to get other people to do the same. And it turns out you can do quite a bit if you don't waste any time and you're always trying to be better at everything that you're doing. You can accomplish a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I see that you are accomplishing a lot and you really have been living by this. So thank you so, so much for your beautiful words. And thank you so much for your time today. This was awesome. I know that anyone listening will be blown away. Jesse, let me ask you, how can people find more about you online? I know your books are on Amazon. Where else can they find you?
Sure. So you can find my American Ninja Warrior video on YouTube if you just type Jesse Orenshein in YouTube. If
That's
you type
exactly what
just
I did. Yes.
Yeah, you can even misspell it, which I felt so famous, right? You can misspell it and it'll still come up. If you wait about a year, there might be another video on there, um, because we just finished taping season 16, but it won't air for a minute.
Oh, wow.
Um, you can find all of my books by typing my name in Amazon, or if you look at grandpaherbiestories.com, that's the name of my children's book company, Grandpa Herbie Stories. Um, we also have Grandpa Herbie Stories on Instagram, but I really only post when we publish a new book. I kind of don't like that people are constantly posting on social media all the time. And everyone tells me, like, if you want to succeed, you have to post every 5 seconds. I just don't buy into that. I'll tell you in a few years if it works out for me. But anyway, we have an Instagram just to inform people of new books, pretty much. That's it. I don't really have a website for being a SoFair or
Okay.
anything like that.
Well, I think that's plenty. Well, thank you, Jesse. And also, if you want to learn more about Jesse Orenshein, check out the article I wrote about him on Aish.com, which is linked in the episode description. You can find this podcast on your favorite podcasting platform and on Aish.com's YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Aish.com for more content like this. And if you like what you see and if you like what you're hearing, don't be shy. We want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Thanks again, and I will see you next week.